Dave, instead of me trying to introduce you and all of your fabulousness, I will let you do a quick introduction. Aside from the fact that you're a past IEPPV president and a Brooks graduate, and you don't suck as a photographer.
Oh,
So,
thank you. I try not to suck.
yeah, you're gonna try. So I'm gonna spotlight your video, buddy. You good to take it away, and I will jump in as needed. So go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm going to do a prerequisite, and that is everything I talk about tonight is basically the way I do it. It doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way to do it or the correct way to do it. I've been doing this for now 4 years, almost 5. And I started off shooting a certain way, and that kind of gradually progressed into a different way of shooting. So this has been a journey for me as I've been shooting many houses throughout the year, up until recently. But I guess I put together an itinerary, and it isn't really in any particular order. It's just talking points that we can go over. So I'm just going to start off with, there's a couple of ways that photographers are out there shooting real estate. When I say real estate, I mean basically for a realtor, not necessarily architectural photography, although I do have an ex-roommate when I went to Brooks Institute that is actually shooting HDR on all of this stuff for all of his buildings and stuff that he shoots. But most photographers for real estate will fall into these two categories, which I'm going to talk about HDR, and I'm going to talk about the new technique, which they're starting to call it, is called flambient. I don't know if you've heard that or not, but it's a technique that blends your flash with your ambient lighting coming into the room. So my outline starts off with HDR, and so this is just the HDR stands for high dynamic range, in case you didn't know, where you combine basically I'll combine up to 3 to 7 bracketed frames in one-stop increments. So depending on the lighting situation that I'm under, whether I have really strong lighting coming in through a window and I need to try and pull as much detail through that window, I might choose 7 stops.
So Dave, are you sharing any kind of video content? Do you need to share your screen?
No, but
okay, we're just talking. Okay, I just
we're
want to
just
make
talking.
sure.
And you know, I can share some stuff. So just a second here. Might as well get it off of my face and onto my computer screen, right?
Awesome. That's kind of what I was going for.
Yeah, that's exactly. Is that better?
Oh, that's so much better.
So you have to look at my mug. So I basically highlighted some images I wanted to be able to go through, but some of these are just your basic, like this is just a 5-image HDR image that was created. There's no flash on this. And you'll notice that there isn't a whole lot of detail out that window.
So this is just ambient light that you did an HDR with?
Correct.
Okay.
5 frames. So you got your -2, -1, normal, +1, and +2. And then that's all put together. And I use Lightroom in Photoshop. So whenever I'm shooting HDR, it's just basically all done in Lightroom. Very rarely do I take anything into Photoshop unless I actually have to fix or remove or, repair something inside of Photoshop. Like sometimes chords, they don't like chords to be showing. So you might, if there's a really bad chord showing, then you might fix that in Lightroom. But for the most part, when I'm shooting HDR, it's get in, get out, and process it as fast as you can. So it's all shot in RAW. So whether I'm shooting HDR or flambient, every image I shoot is RAW. That way I have the most available information to go from. And with Nikons, I know with Canons, you have the ability to go to a medium or a small RAW. It wasn't until I got my latest camera, the Z6, that I had that capability, but I still kept shooting in full res RAW for everything that I do.
So David, do you have some clients that prefer the flambient style where you need to put strobe in, or is that something that you decide when you're there shooting? Like you look at a scene and go, okay, this is
Both.
okay.
Now, and I'll tell you why, because when you get a new a new realtor, I might, depending, just by talking to them, I can tell whether they want to spend money or not spend money. And, but I will explain the difference in the two techniques. And you know what, most of the time they're saying, yeah, I want you to shoot flambient and get the detail out those windows. Because in a lot of places that you go to, they have beautiful scenery looking out those windows, backyards that are beautiful, and you can't pull that in as well unless you're shooting flambient. So I will explain the difference, and most often they will choose the higher priced way to go. But
Okay, so that's what I was going to ask. So you actually have that as a separate shooting
I
fee.
do, I do.
Okay, okay.
I'm on a two-tiered. It's either the HDR price list or it's the flambient, and I decided to go that way because I know that not everything needs to be shot with the most beautiful lighting that you can possibly. Because I've done trailers that are just like trashed out, and it's like, okay, so why spend the money when it's going to be difficult to sell this thing regardless? But
Right, right. Do you have an image to show us like flambient versus just HDR?
let me. Okay, so this is a living room shot. So just a second here. Let me.
And while you're looking for that, John Paul had a question that I don't quite know how to articulate. So John, I turned on your microphone. So
Okay, can you hear me?
yeah, go ahead.
So I know that you can, it's not as good, but I was wondering, do you actually shoot 5 different frames at the different exposures, or do you make virtual copies and go down to
5 different frames.
Okay.
Yeah, and I will go through my camera settings. In fact, we're going to go through my camera bag and show you all of that. And each way is different. And the way I've basically with the Nikon Z6, you got 3 user settings. I've got them programmed for how I shoot, and I use
Right.
those 3 user settings.
Yeah, and to be fair, an HDR is not a true HDR if you just create virtual copies. I mean, that's one way of extracting detail, but technically you're just expanding a raw file as opposed to high definition,
Correct.
stack. So yeah, okay.
Correct.
So this is a flambient.
This is a flambient where you can see a lot, but things just look sharper, and you got a lot more detail, like in the ceiling light up here. Ceiling lights and fans and all of that with a HDR is really difficult to pull in any detail in these lights. The fire was added in the fireplace. Now the only thing about this shot that I probably should have done is I should have flashed out this window where you saw the staircase, but I had actually on this shoot, I had a videographer running around in the house. And so I was kind of like getting off of my game plan as far as I wasn't able to think how I wanted to think on this particular shoot.
Now, how
But
do you deal with color balance when you're adding strobe? Because do you gel the strobes to match the
I
outside light?
shoot, believe it or not, I shoot everything at 5,000 K.
Okay.
So even my so the ambient shot is shot on at 5,000, and then my strobes are shot, and then I balance to the white. So whatever's white in the room is what I use the color picker for and pick white.
Got it.
Okay,
Got
and
it.
everything pretty much will comes into place on that, and you can get pretty decent color just by doing that, as far as I'm concerned.
So just to outline, so the HDR, it's faster, obviously, right? It's harder to match
Correct.
colors, and I'm reading off his outline. I'm not memorizing this stuff. Flaring and ghosting can be a problem with your HDRs, and then you need a computer, obviously, to stack everything. And then the flambient, it's slower, but you get better blending of indoor-outdoor exposures, better color balance. And of course, if you're going to be stacking them, you got to have a decent computer. Most modern
Correct.
computers, though, at any level can handle that kind of processing.
Correct. And and the flash, I mean, there's another major, that color balance. I mean, because you can get into some rooms where you've got a lot of light bouncing around off of different colors of paint, and it can really wreak havoc, especially with shooting HDR. But the flash will totally balance out the room the way it's supposed to be.
Okay, so your flash is basically daylight balanced.
Daylight balanced, correct.
So that any ambient light that comes in, it's in a very similar color range. color
Correct.
temperature.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, yes and no, because you know, you'll get back to some bedrooms or even bathrooms that are all using incandescent lighting. And so you got that tungsten at like 2800K versus what your flash is. But, and I will take you through, it really doesn't matter what that color temperature is, because your flash becomes your main exposure.
No, I'm just curious because I'm looking at your thumbnail. So number 20, frame number 22 looks really warm.
Right. So this would be the ambient to that shot.
Oh, okay. So cool. So that's the ambient, and then the other one is your strobe.
And this is the fix. Oh, so then I go around and I shoot my different flashes. Now notice, okay, so here's the delivered product. Here's my first main flash right above camera, and you see I'm catching highlights off of that cabinetry in the back. So you literally have to walk around and put a flash in another position and shoot that shot just to get rid of that. So when you actually combine them all together, you can use Photoshop and then get rid of those problem areas, so you don't have those reflections. So basically, the flambient is a method where you're combining the luminosity of the ambient, not the color, the luminosity, and painting that back into the flash shot. So it's a difficult process to understand, but once you understand it, it becomes almost second nature.
Right. Okay.
And
now,
you do have, and the only reason why I said, you know, you need a fast computer is because you might be taking anywhere from 2 images to 6 images or 7 images, transferring from Lightroom into Photoshop and shooting at 24 megapixels, you know, my full res raw files, you know, on my old computer that I used to do all my HDR on, it just bogged down, and I was waiting, you know, 1.5 minutes for all these files to load in. Well, if you've got 30 files to go through, that just added another 35, 40 minutes of time just waiting.
Right. Okay. Are you going to move on to creating your sample work? You want to take any questions on the
Well, let's
HDR?
just take questions right now on what we've covered.
Yeah. Does anybody have any questions on the HDR? Bill, let me go ahead and I'll unmute you, Bill. Go ahead. You are not unmuting, buddy. Maybe you need to do it. There
How
you
about
go.
now? Okay. Are you selecting all of the photos and then doing the merge in HDR merge in Lightroom? Or are you taking them and sending them to Photoshop and then doing the kind of like blending through Photoshop?
For the HDR images?
Yes.
No, it's all done in Lightroom. So yeah, I'm just using Lightroom.
It's HDR merge
Correct.
feature.
Correct.
And then do you end up batching that, or do you do it manually
I
each
batch
one?
it.
Okay.
I batch it and walk away for 5 minutes.
So then you're very happy with the new batch feature that they just came out with.
Extremely happy. So what I do when I'm working with the HDRs is I will stack. So I've shot the whole job HDR.
Yep.
I will just go and stack each pile, and it does that automatically. And I put it on like a 5-second interval or whatever. And so it just finds them all and stacks them in their stack. I highlight them all, and then I do the batch HDR and then walk away for a few minutes and then come back.
Okay.
So yeah, and it runs through them pretty fast. Actually, the computer I have, I can actually start working on them as soon as they start spitting out. But I choose to just wait until they're all done.
All right. Thanks, Bill. That was great. I'm going to remute you again just for that. Did anybody else have a question? You can just show me. Oh, Stephen Scharf. All right, Stephen, go ahead and unmute yourself. Apparently my powers of unmuting are not working.
Thanks, Troy. Hi, David. I also do professional real estate photography.
Okay.
So I'm just curious. I usually use Flambient, as you described, with flash and mixing flash and ambient. Manually, I use a layer stack.
Okay.
And then just control things. I'm just curious, where are the situations where you would do an HDR merge as opposed to lighting with Flambient?
If I shoot HDR, it's because I have 2 different price levels. So it means that, and I actually have a realtor, that's all he wants is HDR. He doesn't want to spend any more money than what I charge for HDR. So that would be really the only reason, because I prefer the flambient. However, it does take longer to process the flambient as opposed to HDR. I can get through a 20 to 30 image job on HDR in about 25, 30, 40 minutes. But when you're doing 20 to 30 images on flambient, it could take an hour and a half. So there is a difference.
Yeah, I usually take 2 to 2.5 hours.
Yeah, it's well, and I will show you how I process the stuff. I've created an action in Photoshop that for the flambient, because I was actually creating all those layers manually, just doing everything and I was taking 2 to 2.5 hours to do a job. And once I created this action that just literally puts all the layers that I need out there to work on, it sped things up a lot for me.
Cool. Troy, just before we move on,
yeah.
I've got a little action that I use, David, for creating a layer and then doing a curves auto move for real estate that you guys might find useful. It just gets everything to neutral really quickly as a starting point for your layer stack. So I'll be happy to distribute that to you guys. You can use it if you want. So
yeah, if you have a link, you can just share it in the Zoom chat if you want.
I don't have a link, Troy. It's my own action, so I'll have to just figure out how to export it and then send it to you so you can distribute it.
Oh yeah, like yeah. We're gonna do. I'm gonna go ahead and mute you, Stephen, just to kind of keep the noise down. We're gonna do multi parts of this, just so you know. So Stephen, once you kind of get that dialed in, shoot that over to me. I'll put in a Dropbox link, and then next time you guys come back, I'll throw it in the chat, or you can just ping me. You guys all know who I am, so you can just text me and let me know. David, I'm sorry, you guys are good with your questions, right? Okay, we're gonna move on to the next section. Okay. David, if you want, if you're going to go ahead and talk about creating sample work and talking to realtors and stuff, you could I'm going to disable your screen share.
Okay.
And that way we can see your beautiful face. And go ahead and take it away from here. So we're going to talk about, like if you don't have clients, obviously, and you want to get started, how do you start? How do you start making samples?
So going back to, how I started, basically I had a friend, Steve Graff, saying, "Hey Dave, you need to get into this." And so I said, okay, so let me go on a shoot with you. And I mean, that's a good way, if you can go on a shoot with a photographer who's currently doing this, to at least get an idea of what's expected and all of that. But I've been a photographer for 40 plus years, and so I think, borrowed a couple of his images to start me off so I could have something to show somebody. But then after he actually sent me, because we're friends, he sent me a client that he couldn't do because he was on vacation. And so I actually started shooting for some of his clients to get my own sample work. Once I had that, then I started creating my business cards, flyers, postcards, and all of that. And then it wasn't too long after that, I decided to redesign my website just for real estate, because I shoot sports also and schools. But over this last year, I've been trying to just let it be the real estate for my website. But yeah, if you don't have a contact like that where they can initially help you out, or you can go out and help shoot a house with them to get your own sample work, I suggest that you just go in and shoot your own house or your own apartment to start putting sample work together that way. Because you need sample work. They need something to be able to see. Unless you have a family friend that a realtor that can help you get started, it's really difficult, because realtors like to they don't venture too far from if they're already using somebody. So it's actually been pretty difficult over the years for me to actually break in. But once I broke in, then you start having the realtors passing your name out to everybody, and which is nice, because then you start getting busier. But yeah, the sample work is definitely something that they're going to want to see. And in a lot of cases, I just send them to my website, because by the time I had enough work to show them, now at the time it was all HDR. That was like 3 and 4 years ago. So I didn't start shooting Flambient until a couple of years ago. I started dabbling into it and learning it, and I started using my own home to learn it, because it's not just the shooting process, it's the processing process that actually was the hard thing to understand.
Right. Just, I mean, it's kind of like any discipline, right? You need to be good at it enough, proficient enough that when you do get a job, that you don't stumble around and spend all day there with a realtor, or sometimes there's people in the homes that you have to photograph, right?
Correct.
So, so what would be some places or some ways that if somebody wanted to reach out to a realtor or start to promote their ability, their real estate photography, where would they go?
Well, obviously you can go to their office and talk to them. I've done that, and I've passed out flyers at a whole bunch of offices when I was first starting off. Social media is a great place for you to post sample work and hashtag the hell out of it. For all the different cities, when you start pulling up these hashtags, you'll see Beaumont real estate, Redlands real estate. I mean, they're all out there, and so you just start hashtagging. I picked up realtors through Instagram and my Facebook, and then they start wanting to had a run of realtors wanting to friend me on Facebook. So I accepted all of that.
It's a lot like even like the wedding industry. It's like any industry. If you look at what's out there in a region where you want to go to work, look at all the work that everybody's doing and go do something different, better, more creative, unique. And that way, when they start seeing your work and you start marketing, right, you're going to find a client.
Exactly.
That. So
exactly.
Yeah, and mastering a technique is super, super important. So
I would really suggest, though, before you start out on your own, that you find another photographer that you can at least join with on a couple of houses, so that you understand the flow, the angles, and all of that, and make you feel a little bit more comfortable. I mean, you don't want to look like you don't know what you're doing out there.
Well, I've given everybody your cell number, so now they can all
thank you. No, I'm always willing to help.
So how do you prepare for the photos? How do you prepare, like when you're getting ready to go do a shoot? I'm assuming that's what we're.
I just make sure all my batteries are charged up. I have plenty of equipment. I have backup equipment, and we've got a section to go through my whole camera bag.
Let's do it. Let's hit the camera bag.
You want to hit the camera bag?
Yeah, because it's all my favorite gear.
I know, isn't that awesome? Well, this has been a progression. I'm going to tell you where I started. I started with my Nikon D610 and a Tokina, a 16 to 28. Those were the first things I started using. I found limitations in that fairly fast. Even though the Tokina lens is an extremely sharp lens, and I love the how straight it made the verticals, because it didn't have very much distortion in it at all. It is a bulbous front element on that lens, and you would get flaring, and I didn't care for the flaring that you would get. So I eventually picked up the Nikon 16 to 35 f4 lens VR, and was using that, and I loved using that because you could put a polarizer on the front of that lens, which I like to polarize my floors, because you get some of these floors have a lot of shine on them, and the polarizer helps to knock that down, whether I'm shooting HDR or Flambient. So I kind of went to a system to where I use a polarizer for everything, whether I'm inside or outside. But
I just put your equipment list, what's in your bag, in the chat if anybody wants to see that, and I'll throw some of that stuff in the chat on occasion. So,
and I'm going to show you this stuff. So my camera's right here. So this is the Z6, and you'll see some attachments on the top. Okay, so when I'm shooting a Flambient, this is the trigger for my flash, and this is the camera trigger. So I will literally just wear this on my hip and be able to fire off the camera remotely. Because
So I'm assuming that you're a light stand with legs. You're walking around the room holding the strobe where you want it to be.
and I have this.
Right. So the
So,
camera's
yeah.
set up on the tripod. If you want to light multiple places in the room, you're gonna walk over, push the button, fires the camera, which fires the strobe, and then you move to the next space.
Correct.
Okay.
And I walk around. What's next on my list? You know what? I have backup equipment. Some people don't. They don't take it, but I do. And I have my D750. So after my D610, I went to the D750, which is this. And this one's always set up with the 24 to 120 lens. But the reason why I bought this is because it has a flippy screen. And when you get backed up into a corner, the D610 just was not fun to deal with. So looking down now, all I have to do is just look down at that flippy screen, and I shoot in live mode for everything. So it made life a whole lot easier. The next thing.
So Dave, why would you use a ball head and not a geared head?
Okay, a lot of them do use gear heads. I haven't bought a gear head, and the gear head I would probably want is like $1,200, and I've shoved enough money into the equipment that I have for right now. Holy God! But
so you start with you
gear heads are really
have,
nice because you can get that nice fine adjustment. One of my friends uses a pistol grip, and I really wouldn't care for a pistol grip, but I have settled in on the ball head. I do like the ball head. I was using a 5-axis, head at one time, and I find that just to be a little bit too clunky. I like this because it's just all. Pull back a little bit here. It doesn't take up much room around it. Rather having things sticking off to the side, it's just straight down. And I used to have I started this off with an aluminum tripod and have now gone to a carbon fiber. And this is just basically the lightest setup that you can possibly have. And because you're moving this thing around all the time. So, and you can see, there's my breakthrough photography filter on the front for polarizing. So.
Awesome. Does anybody have any questions about the gear that he has in his bag? No? Okay. So let's
moving on. I use the streak light, which you can get at Adorama. This is a 360 watt flash, and that's what I use. And you'll notice what's on the bottom.
Yeah. Spider holster clip.
Instead of putting a camera on my hip, I just wear this. I do not put it on a light stand. And I walk around just now. So it's generally clipped. Now I'll wear the clip right here, and it's just hanging off the side with the battery pack. And so I just pull it off my hip. I dial in the amount of flash I want, and I start flashing.
Genius.
Light. And I do have extras. I mean, I carry doubles of everything. So I literally got 4 of these things, and just in case. I got batteries up the wazoo just in case. And I actually had it happen where something has stopped working. My flash stopped working. I had a cord go problem, so I switched to the other flash. So, and that's one of the things. I don't want to have to go back to the house and look, like I didn't know what I was doing. So it's actually happened a few times where I actually had to go out and grab spare equipment to come in and finish the job.
Yeah.
I use, and the triggers are the Yongnuos. These are the Yongnuo triggers. And you actually have to stack them the way I have it stacked. Otherwise it will not function correctly. So if I stack these things the opposite and put the flash on top of this, it just will not flash. So there is method to this madness. And this is the newer one where I can actually see all the settings on the back. So this lights up back here. Their older one didn't, not very well anyways. And I also use a Kirk L bracket because there are a couple of occasions, not very often, where you might want to shoot vertical. And it's just easier with the Kirk L bracket.
So with respect to the equipment, when you go into somebody's home, do you have a different pair of shoes that you wear? Do you put on booties? Do you?
Not all the time, but there are times. So you can go out to Amazon and buy the booties. So I do carry these in my car because there have been occasions to where they have just cleaned the house and the floors are they just the steam cleaner people just left from doing the carpets, and so you don't want to walk around and bring dirt from your shoes in on the house. So
Right.
I carry those just in case. It's not. I wouldn't say it's required all the time, although there are some people out there on YouTube that's where he does all the time is he wears the booties. But I look at the situation, whether I need them or not.
And then how about on the tripod? Do you protect the, that rubber foot on the tripod? Is that ever a dirt issue?
You know what? No, I haven't had an issue with that. So
Okay.
on my last tripod, one of the the rubber things actually did fall out. And the reason why I got this tripod is because I ended up gluing that back in, but I forgot to extend the leg out. So it was only a one extension leg now at that point.
So do we want to talk a little bit about your computer equipment and, obviously not too heavy on that, but like what do you see as essential? Because you've been doing this for a couple of years now, so you've obviously made some changes.
Right. I started off my older setup, and it's perfectly fine for doing HDR stuff, but I wasn't having to go and transport images back and forth between Lightroom and Photoshop. But when I started shooting the Flambient, I noticed I was waiting around a long time to get those images back and forth between Photoshop and Lightroom. So I decided to build another computer, and it's one of the it's an Intel i9 9900K. It's got 8 cores and 16 threads, 32 megs of RAM. And I use it entirely. I built it just for real estate. There's no hard drives. It's only got 2 NVMe M.2 SSD drives in it, which are like 5 to 6 times faster than a normal SSD. And they're both 500 gigabyte drives. I also use a storage array to actually store my stuff. So over here is a Drobo that I have like 10 terabytes of storage over there. So I'm not really concerned about storing anything on this computer. In fact, after a month, I will delete the previous month and only keep what I have and transfer it over to the Drobo. Other things that you'll want is to be able to have cloud storage, because the way we deliver our products now is through the cloud. And I first started off with OneDrive, Microsoft OneDrive, but then found that there were some Mac users out there that just couldn't access the images. So I then later, I pulled out a Dropbox account and used that for a little bit, but then I decided to go to Google Drive, and Google Drive works great for everybody. So I've kind of just fell into place on Google Drive. I just got a 200 gig account, $3 a month, not that bad. I use a 4K monitor. The one thing that I do, and I decided to go out and get a gaming mouse just for these side buttons, because if I'm inside Lightroom, I can highlight my images, click this one button right here, and it will automatically, without having to go up to File, go to transport these things all into Photoshop as layers, it'll do it automatically. I downloaded a free program called X Mouse Control. I don't know how you would do this on a Mac, but there is a free program out there called X Mouse Control, and you can plug all that stuff into its program, and it'll control that mouse. And so that's how I do that.
Something about cloud storage. For those of you that have Amazon Prime, I don't know if you're aware, but one of the benefits of Amazon Prime is that you can upload as an unlimited amount of photographs. Unlimited. You have unlimited storage for photos. So you can use that as a distribution. You can upload your photos, create folders, distribute right, as long as you have Amazon Prime. So you don't have to put any additional money into it. Services like OneDrive, Dropbox, Google Drive, they have additional features that might be important to you, like password protection, things like that, depending on what you need. But if you just need some place to throw images up and share links to your clients to download those files, Amazon Drive will do it, and you're probably already paying for it. So.
Mm-hmm. Any questions on computer stuff? I mean, all I can say is if you're going to get into Flambient, you need the fastest computer you can possibly either build or buy or whatever.
And you're
Whatever your
saying
money can afford.
you need that because you're shooting so many images and then you're stacking them.
And you're stacking
right? So it's
them
the
inside.
processing power to stack them.
Yeah, it's just the process of that transfer from Lightroom to Photoshop. Now, if you're not using those combinations of software and you got a different software, then you can do whatever you want with your computer. But I just noticed I needed to speed things up, so I built myself a screaming computer to handle that. Perfect. File transfer back and forth between the programs.
I don't see any hands going up, so let's jump over to your camera settings. So, you know, okay. Cameras in hand, you've walked in, you've got your computer built at home, you've got your stuff set up, right? You got snacks in your bag, you're there.
Exactly.
How do you set up your camera?
So if I'm shooting HDR, and like I said earlier, the Z6 has 3 user modes that you can program. So I have programmed user 1 to be a 5-image HDR, okay? And a Z6, awesome camera. I've also programmed on the function, you probably can't even see that, huh? There's 2 function buttons over here, function 1 and function 2. I programmed function 1 to allow me to change that HDR, whether I want to go 3 frames or 7 frames. Generally, I go up to 7 frames if I'm going to change it. And that's only because I have maybe some strong backlighting coming through a window that I'm trying to maintain as much detail as I can.
So what would be some foundational settings for your camera, you know, recommendations that would work across all the cameras? Because not everybody like you and me has an amazing Z6 or Z7 laying around. Right?
I mean, but you just need to buy one.
But to be fair, I mean, like, what would be? I mean, do you shoot manual? Do you like aperture priority?
Correct.
Do you manual
so
focus,
that is actually programmed from manual, and you're actually choosing your shutter speeds. And oh no, I'm sorry. God, it's been so long since I actually, because I've already programmed it to the camera. I don't have to think about it. And that was one thing about getting the Z6. You can program so much into it, you don't have to think about it anymore.
Well, let me ask you.
Okay,
what's your starting aperture?
I programmed. I remember now. So I programmed for the HDR. I'm in aperture priority because I want to shoot at f8. So I shoot everything at f8 and allow it to choose the shutter speed. And then all I do is, you know, is this going to be a 5-image or a 7-image HDR when I pull the trigger? And that's on a 2-second timer. So even though I'm using the triggers for that, and I use the trigger for either the HDR or the Flambient, for my HDR I still put it on a 2-second timer and let it wrap off all the images. If you don't do that, and you put it on single frame, at least for the Z6, you literally have to hit the trigger 5 or 7 times because it wants to see it as just a single shot on each one. I mean, it'll change the exposures, but it just sees it as a single shot. When
you're shooting your HDRs, are you doing one stop over?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's one stop over depending on how many, how you just analyze the room.
1 stop increments, I'll say that. So
okay.
if it's a 5 frames, then you're going to have 2 stops under, 1 stop under normal, 1 stop over, 2 stops over.
And you just base that on, you just eyeball it?
I base it on the lighting conditions that I'm facing, because some of these windows might have really, I mean, it might be really dark inside the room. So there's not a lot of ambient, and you got a really bright window. Well, you'll get a huge amount of flaring off of that window, especially if it's got dark drapes.
Right.
So, I mean, that's a situation where you should be shooting flash anyways. But if you're shooting HDR, then 7 frames or even 9, you can push things up to 9 frames. I don't think I've ever had to go that far, but I will definitely err to the minus side. So on the Z6, you have live view, and on the back of the camera, you're seeing the exact exposure that you're gonna get as your normal. Okay, so I got a program to shoot the normal first, and then it'll run through everything else. So I'm looking at live view, and I will actually err to the probably start it off at -1 stop, because that'll give me more detail out that window, as opposed to if I put it to what I feel is normal for the room, then everything will get way too bright and you won't even need to use those top 2 frames. So
Right.
I err to the minus side on that.
And to be fair, all cameras are not created equal, and they're all different. They all have their own personalities. So you should test that, because you know, a Z6 or Z7, or you know, compared to the D850, it has more dynamic range compared to, you know, the D750 or whatever Canon camera you're shooting. So go test that, so that you know. So when you walk into a room, you're like, oh, my camera can handle this. You know, I know shooting weddings that I can easily handle 3 stops, no problem. I can pull back data, but you know, you need to test it. So just what you do isn't necessarily translatable to everybody's camera.
And obviously,
so it's better to go test it.
The more houses you shoot and the more situations you put your camera in, you start to learn what the capabilities of that camera is.
Right.
So, so I literally have HDR set on 2. So on user 1 and user 2, those are my HDR. So I will still shoot HDR outside handhold on user 2. But I'm only doing 3 frames. So I will view my exposure through the camera and adjust it, and then I'll create a handheld HDR. And Lightroom has no problem in putting all that together if you want to use the HDR. The reason why I do a 3 frames is I don't always use the HDR. If it's really windy and the wind are blowing the trees and all of that, you're really dialed into just using 1 frame. So basically, it's just a bracketed session, and then I choose the best image to work from when I get back. So that's how I do all my outside pictures. And then user 3 is basically set up for just Flambient.
Perfect. Okay, so that's gear and stuff. So how about we talk about, like, actually you're in the room, camera placement. Like, where do you put the camera? What height do you set the camera at? Do you have a height that you would prefer to set it at?
Yeah, I do. The height that you saw this thing at, which is basically about belly button height for me, you're around 4 feet high, just above counter level. That's how I shoot. A lot of people might go even higher, like 5 feet. But the higher you take that up, the more ceiling you start making apparent in your picture. So you definitely want to keep things level. And I always use the level in the camera through live view. So I'm always got a level, whether this thing is up or down or sideways. And so I'm always leveling it out to what's level to start with. And so yeah, I use this thing at about 4 feet, I guess.
Okay. Like, so I was always curious, like, does a real estate agent, do those people actually have an idea of what they want? Like, do you converse with them and collaborate with them to kind of figure out what angles they want? Because I know you can see Jim Doyle in here, and I know he's done some classes, and I know he's made comments about, well, you know, this real estate agent or this particular person, they want to be able to see the knobs on, you know, the oven or the stove over the counter, where maybe this one doesn't. I mean, like, does that matter?
Yeah, they're all different. I would say most of the time, probably 98% of the time, the realtors I'm working with, they trust me. And whatever I shoot, they totally trust me. And I try not to overshoot, because you can overshoot a house. You don't need, 50 images, in my opinion, on a 2,000 square foot home. So I've gotten to the point where, I used to ask them, how many images do you want? And I never asked them about angles, because realtors really don't know what's a good angle and what's a bad angle. That's something that you just need to learn. If you don't know, start looking at magazines or architectural photography, or just going online and looking at the really good photos that you see of real estate on MLS listings. But for me, I always try to photograph the house using angles that will show rooms leading to other rooms, so we get an idea of how that that whole house flows together.
Do you have any
There,
samples of that work? Do you have any samples of images that show like a flow through a house?
yeah, let me share my screen again. Let me just click on this house is fine. And let me, so here's the whole house that I did. And this particular one, I stayed to do twilight pictures. You can see down here at the
Now
end.
just remember that that's very, very, very tiny.
Yeah, I know. I'm
us. So
I know. Well, let's make it even tinier.
yeah.
I'm putting this back into order here. Okay. So here's the front of the house that I actually shot at twilight. And so I always try to do a couple of angles on the front of the house. I will shoot one straight on, and I will shoot one off to the side. Now, generally speaking, I don't like to shoot on the garage side. I would generally speak but I had this tree over here that was hiding the house. So that was just not an option on this particular house. So I decided to give her that and then give her that. And then coming on the inside of the house, I always like to do a shot that shows where the front entry of the door is coming in and how they see that. And in this case, we had all these beautiful windows. This is obviously shot with Ambient because I wouldn't have been able to hold the detail out those windows very well on shooting HDR or even those trees out there.
So let me ask you a question on your tripod is placed here. Now, I'm assuming that your head is perfectly level, right? You're not tilted up,
Correct.
You're not tilted down. So that way you don't get any parallax in the lines and the walls and things
and
like
if
that,
it's
right?
not, it's all corrected back in Lightroom or actually Photoshop.
Oh, okay, and then you correct it anyway. Okay, but I mean,
I correct everything. Yes, even not very often does the camera give you the perfect. I mean, even though that level says you're level, doesn't mean you're necessarily level. So
okay, but
I
good
still correct
practice.
everything. Yeah.
Good practice would be to set that up level.
Yeah, but I always set it to what the camera says and go from there. But yeah, everything needs to be readjusted back in Photoshop or Lightroom. So this is a shot looking back at the front door, and now I'm standing at the front door looking into the house. Okay, so you can see the balcony up there, and that's what I'm talking about. You want to see how rooms flow together. I mean, I kind of put myself in the buyer's position. It's like, how would I want to see this house? If I show each room just by itself, kind of like this, you don't get an idea of where this is in the house. But I shot this because it's a progressional shoot of looking down into this. Now you'll notice from the front door, this is shot at an angle. Okay, I'm shooting basically kitty corner into this room.
So before you change images, how many images are in this shot?
Let me check.
Because inquiring minds want to know.
Turn off flag.
And Christine's asking, do you provide a dollhouse view?
A dollhouse view.
Yeah, I don't even know what that is.
Is that like looking down into the? I've never heard of that. What is she saying?
No, just asking. Is there? And Bill is also asking. At 363 Matterport. Okay. And Bill is also asking, is there such thing as too wide? I would think at some point the lens itself wouldn't lend itself to that room.
You know what? That actually is a really good question. There has actually been some lawsuits. Now I shoot everything at most everything at the 14 millimeters, the widest I can go, but I will crop in. I just want to be able to make sure I have that distance because sometimes, like you can see in the screen, you can see this cabinet right here in the middle of the screen. The more you zoom in, the more you're going to lose the tile down at the bottom. And so I shoot everything at 14 and then crop from there.
So
in
so how
most
many
cases.
images do we have in that one
In that
photo?
one shot, let me just a second here. I'm about ready to get there.
Looks like 5.
So this one shot right here, find my ambient. Looks like it starts right there. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 shots.
Can you show us each one of those, like what your, because the first one's your ambient.
Let's yeah, just a second here. So let's click on that, the beginning.
Okay.
So that's my ambient shot. Okay. Then I shoot a main flash shot, and you can see my flash is in this window now. Okay. Now I did not use this one. Okay, so you'll notice at the bottom of this, you'll see the that's had some image adjustments before it goes into Photoshop. So I actually did not use this frame. And then I come over here and I'm shooting that room, flashing that room on either side. And when I'm on one side, I'm actually lighting the other side of the room.
Now it's interesting because so you're not actually using a modifier on the strobe, and you're not lighting with harsh
I
light. You're
use the
bouncing it
ceiling.
off the walls. Yeah, so you're letting it cascade around the room.
Yeah,
That's very
yeah.
natural. Yeah.
yeah. And so then we have that, and then we have this final flash back here to help blend that in a little bit better. Because when you're going around, look how dark that is back there in the main kitchen living room area. So I just wanted to. I always go back into those areas and flash those areas also, and then come up with my final blended image.
Now going back to lens choice, how bound are you? I don't know, legally, ethically, or whatever, to show the room accurately proportionate. I mean, if you shoot a lens that's too wide, you're going to make that room look like it's 1,000 square feet, but it's not.
Exactly, and that's what I was going to talk to you about. I mean, there's a fine line here because, you have to use a wide angle lens to be able to show this kind of information. Does it show it accurately as far as how deep this thing is? Not at 14 millimeters, no. They say that I would say that 18 is probably better of a perspective, anywhere between that 17 to 20 range. But and if I can, I will back up and zoom in so that I can get to that. Okay, but there isn't. Not every situation lenses you don't have that room behind you to be able to do that, but yet you still have to photograph the room. So I haven't been said that what I'm doing is bad, but I know that there are some photographers that have been sued because the perspective of the room wasn't correct, and they used some super ultra wide lens. I don't know what they used, but it's always best if you can stand a little further back and zoom in than it is to use that full thing.
Right. So before we move away from this image, Stephen Sharp had a question about the windows. Stephen?
David, are you doing a window pull where you're flashing the window and then blending it in using darken mode?
I do not do window pulls. I do everything without window pulls.
So then are you basically cutting a path to let the window come in from an ambient shot?
No, I'm still using now this I probably could have pulled more detail out of, but I had the from my flash over here. I actually had that detail over there, but I have an action, and I'll show you how I run through that. I choose to do things for what I'm charging to do this. I tend to try and make it as quick as possible, and the more frames, I mean, I've already shot 5 frames or whatever on this particular shot, and shooting another window pull and dealing with that. And what he's talking about is there are photographers out there that will actually overexpose like this wall and expose for the outside, your detail outside. Okay, well, when you overexpose that wall, and then turn it into, when you get into Photoshop, you turn it into that layer into darken mode. All you have to do is just brush in your windows,
right.
and it's really easy. but that's just another step that I choose not to do.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. And I don't know if
Good
that's
question.
what you wanted
Thanks,
to hear
David.
or what, but you know, what I'm doing is working for me. And I choose not to go and make it as I try to keep it as simple as possible. So, you know, I know that, and you're probably, I don't know if you've probably seen the Nathan Cool. I've watched every one of his videos. So I know what you're talking about. Can you turn him back on?
Oh, he can unmute himself.
Yeah, so I certainly have Nathan's books, but I also learned that technique from Rich Baum as
Right,
well.
correct.
Yeah.
Those two I have thoroughly watched every video on, probably about 4 times. You know,
Yeah.
it did take me a while because I did learn this on my own, basically through their help, through YouTube. So I'm really happy that they put that information out there. I got to a point with my HDR saying, this is just not cutting it for me. I want something better. And so I started looking on YouTube to see what people were doing, and I came across those guys.
Yeah.
It was awesome.
So
Yeah, they're
David,
great.
so David, when you're building, when you're photographing a room like this, and you're stacking your images, and you want to get your outside ambient light, how are you consciously trying to keep that natural? Meaning that, you know, if I'm in a room like this and I look outside, that sky is not going to be, you know, sapphire blue, right? I mean,
right.
are you consciously thinking of that?
I am.
Okay.
I'm trying my best to, okay, what would be that exposure out there? Because I'll shoot my ambient and then I will shoot, I will readjust now I've got and we didn't go over this setting on the Z6 or mirrorless cameras. You can actually program the focus ring. I actually use that as my exposure compensation. So I don't have to sit here and change my shutter speed that way, which will move the camera a lot more. I just use this ring here as my exposure compensation. So that's my exposure right there, all in one ring. Does that make sense?
Got it. Got it.
Okay.
Cool. So what is some more of the flow through the house? So you said you want to
Okay,
show like you're walking through the house.
Let me go back to my flagged images and, okay, so put them back in their natural order. Just a second here. On that, we got to go to file name. Okay, so then I did a shot looking straight into the room. So this would be another perspective that you're just shooting straight into the room. And you can do this when you got the room. Now look at how long that couch looks, you know. But for this particular realtor, she also staged this. So she has a staging company. So she's looking to see all of her stuff in the room because she likes to use these images for her staging company. So not only am I shooting for her as a realtor, I'm shooting for her as a stager too. So
do you have any control over what time of the day you get to photograph the house?
If you want, but I've gotten to the point where I don't really care what time of day it is. I'll go shoot it and I'll make it the best I can possibly make it. And if that means I have to swap the skies out to make it the best, then that's what I'll do for the outside of the house. The inside of the house, it really doesn't matter. You're only limited to, I mean, you can only do so much. And that sun, if that sun is behind the house, regardless, it really doesn't matter what time you go and photograph it practically. Right, so right. I've just gotten to deal with any lighting situation that I come across.
So just for the sake of time, we're at an hour and a half. Do you want to show how you process some images? I assume that would be pretty helpful for everybody, is to see how he's putting them through, you know, the computer and
probably
HDR and...
we could do a flambient, because HDR is pretty cut and dry. You're either going to use your own HDR software, or you can use Lightroom or whatever. But I think the flambient is probably what people would be the most.
Yeah, let's go through a couple more images so we can kind of see how you walk through the house, and then let's pick an image for you to edit. Like maybe can you work on this one? Show us how you put the fire in and.
Sure. Okay. Sure.
I'm trying to trip you up, man. I'm trying to throw questions at you.
Now I got to think. Yeah, the problem with this is, I mean, we're always trying. You can see barely some lights. These lights that she had did not produce a whole lot of light on the wall. So. I did the best I could, but let me
I
Okay.
gotta say, I love the, and I don't know, maybe you can tell me what your opinion is, but I love the fact that there's sunlight coming in across the wall. I think that makes it feel so natural.
Yeah, 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 it just gives it that natural feel. Um, do I kind of cringe when I walk into this particular environment and see that really strong, because it was really strong lighting. I mean, an HDR would be really hard pressed to pull any detail out of this area in the carpet, but um, with flash you can do it. So, well, let me see here. Um,
I'll pick any image you want. I don't know if you had one already queued
I was
up,
going to do
but
an easier one.
do an easier one then. We'll do a hard one for part 2.
Yeah, we'll do harder ones. You got to work into this. Just a
These are all
second.
advanced people, man. They're not slouches.
They're all advanced. Okay, well,
Yeah.
I was going to show you. Okay, so here's a bathroom. Take it off a file name, put it on capture time.
And then, David, do you normally try to keep the ambient lights on in the room? I mean, do you try to show like what natural light is? So like you want to see lights in the lamps or lights in the
Yes,
ceiling?
I have them turn all the lights on.
Okay.
So if there's a light, it gets turned on if we remember to turn it on. Sometimes these switches, that's another thing. Switches, it's hard to find where these things turn on in some of these houses. And you're like, how does this light turn on? And you're there all alone, you know, trying to figure things out. Okay, so this was the finished product. And let's just show you, there's the ambient and there's the flash. Did I shoot another one? So sometimes, and I didn't use this one, so on this particular shot, you can see some of the light from the flash right here. And it's really bright in the ambient, so you totally lose it. But in this particular shot, I diminished it. Is that the, yeah, that's the one that I used. So I diminished it by using the ambient in that particular shot. But if I were to process these things, let's go into the development module. And I'm going to hit reset on those so you can see what they were exactly looked like. Okay, so I shoot everything at 5000K. So obviously this bathroom had some really yellow lighting, but knowing that my flash would eliminate all of that. So I have an action. Can you all see my whole screen over here? I do a basic.
Yeah, we should be able to. Yeah.
I do a basic flambient, and I'll show you those. If you look, can I move this box of people around on my screen somewhere else?
Yeah.
There we go. Got it. Okay, so if I go to my basic, this is the setting I start off everything, okay? My highlights are down, my shadows are up. That's why I can get as much detail as I can in all of those areas. I bring my whites down a little bit. I bring up the contrast a little bit. When I'm dealing with just the ambient, I will actually bump that up a little bit more. It does the lens corrections, but I do not do any transforming. And I know that one guy who was talking earlier, Nathan, decides to correct everything before he takes it out. I don't. I would rather just do the final corrections inside of Photoshop. So the only thing I do now at this point is I will come in and color balance the thing, and we all assume that this thing's white. So just by hitting that, I've brought that back in again. Now, if you're not going to be using this, the color of this image, you don't even have to do that, because in Photoshop, you're just dealing with a luminosity layer, which is, it doesn't deal with color. So, but I utilize this in both ways. So I will actually correct all of my images that I take in to Photoshop. Okay. You'll also notice there's a little bit of my corners go dark, and that's because of the lens, the profile of the lens. I also have a preset that basically brings that back again. So I'll do that. Now I'm going to bring these two images into Photoshop just by hitting my mouse, which should take us over to Photoshop and layer those up as layers in Photoshop.
Which I think that's Command or Control E.
Yeah, it's actually it's right mouse button, and then you got to go down to somewhere. I'll tell you what, after doing that several times, you'll go nuts. So setting up the button on the mouse was a lifesaver. So I shoot the ambient first, and then I start shooting my flash shots. Now this is only an ambient and then a flash, so this one's going to be easy to deal with. But if you have more than one flash shot, I would take, and we can do this on the next one when I do another image, but I will turn off the ambient, and then I will bring this layer down to the bottom and start reorganizing all of my layers in here backwards, so that my flash will be all the way down at the bottom, and then all of my other layers, other flash layers, go up on top of that, okay? So this would be the simplest of a flambient. So I'm going to highlight the flash, leave and turn them both on, and I have created what I call a flambient. So over on the left-hand side of the screen, you can see my actions just under align layers. The align layers I don't always use, because if I actually see that my layers are not aligned, I will align them. But I think these are pretty good, so I don't need to align them. And that's the cool thing about reprogramming that the focusing. Normally, fine focus adjustment on the Z, or on, I think most mirrorless cameras can do this now. I'm not moving my camera when I'm touching it, so everything stays pretty dialed in as far as pixel on top of pixel. So I'm just going to hit this thing right here, and it's going to create a whole bunch of layers, and it's going to stop my action. So what it just did is I had it made all of these layers. See, these are layers I used to do manually, and it would just take me forever. So I said, why don't I just create an action that does everything that I need right now? And it's applied, if you look at this, a 50% luminosity mask over the whole thing. So right now, in its present state, it is just blended flash and ambient 50%. Okay, does that make sense, everybody?
So without, I mean, nobody has your action.
No, they don't.
So
I actually just created this action about three months ago.
So if everybody sends you $100,
well, they may want to send me more after they find out what it does. But no.
No, I mean, but because they don't, we don't have your action to process the image in that way. So it's cool to see how you're doing it, but it would be nice to see a manual process.
And we can do that too.
Okay.
We can do that too.
Unless you're going to hand out the action, That's up to you.
We can do that too. But so I created this action that just throws all this stuff out there. Basically, I have my flash on the bottom. I have an ambient at 50%, so it's mixing it with the flash. And then I have basically the flash, a copy of this on top of that, and I'll show you why. And then I have another copy of just the ambient, okay? And they're darked out, so they're not even showing right now. The screen right here is how I make my fireplaces. So I don't know if you know this, but Photoshop has this beautiful feature, and I will go grab my freehand thing, where you can actually create a fire by going into render flame. Say that was a fireplace, not a toilet. Or it'll render a flame, okay? And then you
can render trees as well.
Yeah, it is really cool. So then I will sit here and adjust this depending on how it's going to fit in the fireplace, and then if there's grates in front of that, I will literally erase everything, the grate, so it looks like the fire is behind the grate. So that's just me, though.
Troy, can I ask a question real quick?
Sure, David, are you good?
Yeah, go ahead.
David, it looks like you just created layer masks of your base ambient layer and your flash layer that's filled with black. Is that correct?
Correct, and I'll show you why. So
I understand why, but go ahead for the rest of the group. I just want to confirm that's what you did in.
yes, they are the same things. Okay, so in ambient, if I want to paint some more ambient in, like on this toilet, and get rid of the flash that normally I would be on like a, okay, so if you look at the top, I've got a 100% flow, and I'm normally sitting, oh, that was on erase. That's why it did that. Let's go back. Okay, so let's put on the brush. Let's go. I'm on a 10%, 10 or 20% flow, depending on how much I want to blend into each other. So you can just bring this thing out and just start blending these things. You're seeing very minute changes on some stuff. Now, if I came up here and blended that, you'd see all the ambient that just came through on that, and that's how that exposure was. Okay, I'm going to erase that, but I want to bring more detail back into that, so I just hit on my flash copy. I don't have to change from white to black or anything like that. I can just start bringing that detail back in there. That was gone. The reason why I have the copy of the ambient, and the reason why I color corrected the ambient, is so if I see some really weird artifacting with shadowing and stuff like that, I can go back in there and paint that, and generally it'll go orange. Okay, I can go in there and paint it, and it'll, you know, you can just work it in, and it'll look a whole lot better than just leaving an orange shadow in the room. So that's why the ambient copy is there. The burn and dodge layer, obviously, if I wanted to burn and dodge more of this stuff in, I could do that. The color layer is set so that if my room is going a little bit on the crazy side, and generally it's when you do this 50% blend, you can get your ceilings will start to look a little bit on the orangey side. So I've created a color thing that I will come in here and just, you know, paint those out and clean them up a little bit. This is a white room, so and technically, you know, I could paint some of the color out of that light if I wanted to. I decided to put in some corrections here so that I have control over the amount of contrast and brightness over the whole entire room. And then there's not much here to saturate, but you know, you can, if the room requires it, you can pull it in.
That's a hue saturation layer.
That's just a hue saturation layer.
Okay. Cool.
And so with those, I find I can do most everything that I want to do to a room. This action is still in the making. Doesn't mean I won't add more stuff to it, but I found myself using this stuff the most. And so I just decided, you know what, why do all this manually? It was taking me forever. I just decided to do it. And that way I don't have to sit here and change my blending mode from white to black. I can just be painting white on all of those layers and bring the stuff back in the way I want it. Does that make sense, everybody?
So yeah, so that's nice. So David, we're coming up on 2 hours, so
Okay.
we're going to go ahead and wrap this up in the next 10 minutes. So and obviously there's more. I would love to see, like in part 2, actually have you take a handful of images and just actually work through it manually so we can see that whole process, because that in and of itself is a whole.
Well, let me just, there's one more section to this thing. So when I'm done with an image, I continue my action on, and then I go ahead and do my verticals. I just do it right here in Camera Raw. I'm just going to grab these lines because they're the most prominent. And by the way, I'm hitting the Alt key to magnify that. I'll hit OK on that. Then it'll take me into a crop tool, and I'll crop it however I want to crop it. Hit save, and I'm done. So that's how I would go through that whole action. Okay, Troy. We're back. I think. Where's Troy?
Thank you, David. It helps if I turn on my microphone.
There you go.
I snuck out to use the bathroom, and then I came back in and I didn't turn it back on. Questions. You guys got questions? This is a time when you can needle his brain No, everybody's either sleeping. Half the people have their
Action put
cameras
them to
turned
sleep,
off.
I think.
It's a lot of information for sure.
It was. And when I start doing multiple flashes, it becomes even more wow.
Right.
So I'll just add a comment, Troy, if I may. This is Stephen. David had a nice example for the audience of how he walks around the room with the flash and basically holds the flash in different parts of the room and then just bounces it off the ceiling. And I do that, and another pro that I work with, Peter Lyons, does that. It's a very nice, effective way to speed up your workflow in the room by just walking around with the light. And basically, you're basically putting light on the other half of the room. Then you walk to the other side and you put light up there, and then it fills on the other side. And then
Correct.
you can blend both of those halves in when you do your blending in Photoshop.
Correct. And we'll show that, you know, on the next time around. I can easily show that.
Right.
You'll be seeing pictures of my stomach, so it's like, yes, I know I'm not a beauty queen, so whatever.
Well, David, I want to thank you. I'm sure everybody else is very, very excited that you did this for us. And, just for those that didn't hear in the beginning, because we can't meet in person and do this class, we're doing this virtually. This is going to be a prerequisite, by the way. These two classes, we're going to do part 2, is going to be a prerequisite for the live class that he's going to do. So these will be recorded, posted on IEPPV's YouTube channel in the next couple days, and then you guys can watch them at your leisure over and over and over.
Thank you for everybody showing up. That was awesome.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thanks, everybody.